This video assignment will look at the impacts and vulnerability of the City of Chelmsford to climate change, with a particular focus on Chelmsford's vulnerability to flooding. Chelmsford is located in Essex in the east of England. It is the county town of Essex and is the administrative centre for local government. Chelmsford has a population of 110,000 people and in 2012, after much campaigning, was granted city status. Hi, my name is Susie and this is Chelmsford, where I've been living for 4 years. Chelmsford originated in AD 60 when a Roman fort was built and a town grew up around it. The first reference to the settlement of Chelmsford dates from 1189. In 1381, during the Peasant Revolt, Chelmsford briefly became the capital of England when Richard II temporarily established his centre of government here. The revolt culminated in many of the rebels being executed at Primrose Hill in Chelmsford. Chelmsford city centre is comprised of retail, commercial and residential buildings. The retail sector is a mixture of national chains and independent retailers. The weekly market dates back to 1199 when Chelmsford was granted a royal charter giving permission for a local market to be held. Like all towns and cities within the UK, the economic downturn has affected commerce within the city, leaving empty retail units. Several new developments are in progress to help counteract this downturn, such as the redevelopment of the former university site into a new commercial centre and the development of one of the city centre car parks into a large retail space in conjunction with the department store chain John Lewis. Chelmsford is famous as the birthplace of radio through its association with Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi was an Italian electrical engineer who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1909. Marconi is credited with inventing the radio. In 1912, Marconi established the first purpose-built radio factory in New Street, Chelmsford. At its peak, the New Street Works employed 4,500 people. The company has now been divided and sold, with only the defence section remaining in Chelmsford, which is now owned by BAE Systems. The New Street Works site is currently being redeveloped into 400 new homes and office spaces. Chelmsford is within the London commuter belt, with London being the most popular destination for Chelmsford workers to travel to outside of Chelmsford itself. Commuting is mainly by train. Chelmsford is serviced by the Norwich to London line, which was built in 1842 and is operated by Greater Anglia Train Company. To establish the train line through Chelmsford required 3 viaducts to be built. The station itself is built on the end of the longest viaduct, which is the 18-arch Central Park Viaduct. Chelmsford, like the whole of the UK, has a maritime climate. It is situated in a relatively flat area of England, around 20 miles from the coast, and is 21 metres above sea level. The prevailing winds in the area are from the southwest. During spring and summer, there is a secondary prevailing wind from the north. Met Office records for the 30-year period from 1981 to 2010 show an average annual temperature max of 14.6 centigrade and an average minimum temperature of 6 degrees centigrade. Seasonal temperatures vary from an average of 7.4 degrees centigrade in January to 22.9 degrees centigrade in July. Average monthly rainfall for the 30-year period is 49.31 millimetres of rain, and the wettest month is October with 64.1 millimetres of rain. The sunniest month is July, with an average of 209.9 hours of sunshine, and December the least, with an average of 47.4 sunshine hours. The IPCC Fourth Assessment Report outlines climate change in Europe for the 21st century. These climate change predictions are based on a range of emission scenarios depending on different political and social choices. The IPCC states with a very high confidence that there is a warming trend across Europe, with spatially variable changes in rainfall. The report highlights the 2003 heatwave as an example of the way climate change is now impacting across Europe and the subsequent negative human health impacts this has had. Temperature in Europe is expected to rise by 2.5 to 5.5 degrees centigrade in the higher emission scenario, or by 1 to 4 degrees centigrade in the scenario with a greater climate mitigation. In all climate change scenarios, annual mean precipitation increases in Northern Europe. This is expected to especially affect winter precipitation. Winter floods are likely to increase in maritime regions, with flash flooding likely to increase throughout Europe. Coastal flooding due to increased sea level rise and storminess is predicted to threaten up to an additional 1.6 million people annually. There is expected to be more frequent and prolonged droughts during summer months, particularly in southern Europe. Without any significant adaptive measures to mitigate climate change, it is predicted that crop suitability will change across Europe, with production increasing in northern Europe but decreasing in southern Europe during the 21st century. There is high confidence that climate change will affect economic activity across Europe, not only in the agricultural sector, but in many other industries such as tourism, insurance and transport. The magnitude of the effect will depend on the extent of mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Chelmsford is surrounded by an extensive river network made up primarily of the River Chelmer, River Cann and River Wid. This river network was an important part of the industrial transport links that allowed Chelmsford to thrive during the early industrial era. The downside of this is the vulnerability the area has to flooding, with 50% of the city currently lying within high-risk flood zones. Prior to the implementation of extensive flood defences in the 1960s, Chelmsford experienced much flooding with two extreme events in August 1888, known as the Great Flood, and in September 1958. Chelmsford is currently experiencing high levels of rainfall, with averages across the UK at 167% of the 1981 to 2010 30-year average. The success of Chelmsford's adaptation to flooding has so far meant that flooding has mainly been restricted to designated floodplains, parks, nature reserves and non-built-up areas. This has reduced the impact on people, but has still led to a large impact on biodiversity, particularly with the flooding of local nature reserves. Small mammals are left particularly vulnerable because they are unable to access the protection of burrows or vegetation. Livestock are also vulnerable to flooding, with 8 horses recently rescued from flooded grazing pasture on the edge of Chelmsford. The vulnerability to flooding of livestock, as well as agriculture, leads to issues regarding food security, and with the predicted increase in rainfall in the UK due to climate change, these issues are likely to increase. Chelmsford City Council has just finished the planning stages for a large flood alleviation scheme which will aim to protect 1,200 commercial buildings and houses from future flooding. The flood alleviation scheme has been adapted to take into account that more extreme and more frequent flooding events are likely in the future. The plan combines the creation of floodwater storage areas upstream from Chelmsford, along with improvements and additions to structural flood defences within the city centre. Work is due to start in March 2014. The effect on transport is the main transboundary impact resulting from flooding. Chelmsford's position as a commuter city for London means that disruptions to the railway line or roads due to flooding or storm damage has an economic impact because of the large number of people unable to get to work. Chelmsford is situated partway along the train line, so should the Chelmsford part of the line become flooded, then it impacts upon those in London commuter towns further down the line. Flood defence measures in Chelmsford may reduce the impact to the city, but may cause the flood effect to be greater further downstream by moving rather than solving the problem. There has been a general strategic change in flood defence planning in the UK, away from promoting runoff to creating flood storage. This new strategy is incorporated into Chelmsford's new flood alleviation scheme, which should help resolve the issue of pushing the flood problem into adjacent areas.
The main potential vulnerability that Chelmsford has to climate change is the city's risk to flooding. Climate change is expected to increase the amount and severity of flooding in the area, with the current extensive flooding likely to be part of this trend.
Raindrops are falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. So I just did me some talking to the sun, and I said I didn't like the way he got things done, sleeping on the job.